Alrighty. We've tried to film this several times and keep getting interrupted or things keep happening. So here we go. We're back with Catalyst by Lisa Beeson. Chapter 27. And it's a long one, so let's try and get into it again. We're gonna try. Ari jerked awake, reflexively moving her arms. A shock of pain ran from her wrists up to her shoulders. Confusion hung over Ari like a dismal fog. Her eyes were open, but she was still in pitch-black darkness, and she had the disturbing, ominous feeling of not being alone. The noxious push was unmistakable. She was trapped in a pitch-black room with a shade. It was just like her reoccurring nightmare. Keeping her breathing steady, she tried to get a handle of her rising panic and began methodically taking stock of her situation. She could feel that she was sitting on a cold metal chair. Her ankles were zip-tied to the legs of the chair, and her wrists were zip-tied together behind the back. Her hands were cold and painfully swollen from lack of circulation. Her whole body felt sore and bruised. Then it registered that she was only wearing her sports bra and underwear. Her clothes were gone. The shade's lustful tendencies aside, this was more likely a tactic to make her feel exposed and vulnerable. The weight of the bluestone pendant was gone as well. They had stolen it. They had taken everything away from her. They were trying to break her. She realized the reason it was pitch black was because there was a black fabric sack over her head. Ari looked through the fabric, only to see more darkness. She tried to look further through the walls, but she couldn't. She tried using her enhanced hearing, but the only sound she could hear was the heavy breathing coming from the shade behind her to the right. Whatever building material was used to make the room must be acting as an anechoic Faraday cage, preventing her from using her abilities past the confines of the room. She could use her sifting strength to easily break the zip ties around her wrists and ankles to relieve the pain and give her a way to defend herself, and then escape by unsealing the door like Soren. But even though she had gained some strength back after being unconscious, her stomach was painfully empty, and her energy wouldn't last very long on an empty tank. She also had no idea where she was or what she was dealing with. She didn't know to what extent the ex-German shade had meant by cooperating. She couldn't risk the lives of her parents for her own comfort. Ari heard what sounded like the shade standing up, his black energy aura making him invisible in the darkness. By the sound of the rustling of its clothes, she could tell it was coming towards her. "If you touch me, I'll break every bone in your hand," she warned, not knowing if she'd be able to back up the threat. There was the sound of a gusty huff of breath, as though it was laughing at her. Then it moved towards the area in front of her, and without a word, it knocked on something solid. Hey. Then it moved. There was a hissing sound, and then a door opened. She immediately heard a deep rumbling, a hum of large engines, like those of a plane or a large ship. In the second or so that the door was open, Ari was able to get a glimpse by the dim light coming in that the body the shade had stolen was a tall man. He was turned away from her, and his head was covered by the hood of his jacket. She also noticed his right hand was twitching violently, while it held the night vision goggles he had apparently been wearing. Quickly closing the thick door and locking it behind him, she was again plunged into darkness and silence. I couldn't help thinking that something about that shade had been familiar, but she couldn't place it. Not that she was able to think very clearly with the pain radiating through her body and her voracious hunger gnawing at her insides. She allowed herself a despondent sob since nobody was watching her anymore. What am I going to do? How am I going to be able to save my parents? My beautiful, wonderful, saintly parents, whose only mistake was bringing me into their lives. Please, let Val have gotten back to Scion's Keep, she prayed. Ari was left so long in the silent darkness that she began to experience a paranoid agitation, and nodded off in bouts of fitful sleep. She had no idea whether it was night or day. All she knew was fear, pain, thirst, and hunger. After what seemed an eternity, her lips dry and tongue thick and sandpapery, her stomach a hard, angry knot, there was the sound of the fluorescent light bulbs flickering and buzzing to life above her, and then the hydraulic hiss of someone unlocking and opening the door to her cell. The door closed again, but didn't lock, and she felt that two shades had entered. She was thankful that her isolation was over, but completely repulsed by them at the same time. The oily mass of their dark auras filling the small space and practically suffocating. She was already captured, so there was no reason not to shield herself from their noxious presence. Once she did, the room became less claustrophobic and bearable again. The black sack was suddenly ripped off of her head, and the harsh fluorescent light momentarily blinded her. Her eyes ached, struggling to adapt to so much sudden light. When she was able to focus, she saw that the room was only a 12 by 12 cell, lined with a white polymer plastic, and the lights were built in flush with the ceiling. One of the shades was male, and the other was female, each with a brand new stolen body, or vessel as they put it, which Ari recognized had been taken from the group that had been in the factory. 2 more lives laid heavily on her conscience. The male was holding a tray that had a large plastic cup of water, a small bowl of white rice, and a bruised peach on it. Ari couldn't stop her stomach from growling at the paltry feast. Both of the shades sneered at the embarrassing sound, and their laughter was abrasively loud after so much silence. The male put the tray on the ground, and the female came close to take Ari's chin between her fingers, tilting her face up towards the light. "It's a damn shame," she said, shaking her head in disappointment. "You must have been such a beautiful thing. But now you're damaged," she said, motioning to Ari's many scars, all too apparent in her scant amount of clothing. Ari yanked her chin away from the shade's grasp. The cloying perfume she was drenched in gave Ari a headache. The body she stole had been a pretty Asian girl with bleach blonde hair. She had painted the face with a grotesque amount of makeup to mask what her parasitic presence was leaching from its natural beauty. "Just try and possess my body. I dare you," Ari rasped through her parched throat. "Oh, there's no threat of that," the female assured her with a dismissive wave of her hand. "You're too important to Fett." Fett. Why does that name sound familiar? It was hard to think past the dull, throbbing pain of her shoulders and hands. Ari tried to bend her elbows to get some circulation going, but it only made the zip tie cut deeper into the flesh of her wrist, and she gasped at the searing pain. Blood welled up underneath the tie. She wanted to scream, but instead she blew out the pain in a steady stream. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction. Not blind to Ari's distress, the female shade stepped behind the chair. "Naseth!" she yelled at the male shade accusingly. "Sesva said to bind her, not to make her hands fall off. Look at them. They're turning purple and dripping blood," she screeched. "If he wanted her mangy, he would have let Shahak Shah have his way with her." Naseth came around to see and grimaced at the sight of them. "I didn't know I made it that tight. I was just making sure she couldn't get free. You didn't see what this bitch did to the others. She's a monster." Ari winced. To be called a monster by a shade was both ironic and insulting. "Well, you did your job. Now go get some duct tape to bind her up with instead," the female instructed. Naseth looked at Ari warily. His stolen body had gold-rimmed teeth, ridiculously large gauges in his earlobes, and tattoos on his face and neck. "Don't let your guard down, Sazi," he warned. "I'll be fine. Just go before her hands fall off," Sazi said with an impatient flick of her head. Naseth nodded, then quickly left, closing and locking the door behind him. Once the door was closed, Sazi walked over to the tray lying on the floor. "I bet you're dying of thirst," she said as she crouched down to pick up the cup of water. She held it out to Ari enticingly, while drops of condensation were sliding down the outside and over her fingers. Ari couldn't help herself from leaning towards it, even though it strained her arms. She never wanted anything more in her life. You haven't had anything to eat or drink in about 4 days now. Not that the first 3 count. You were unconscious for those, Sassy said. 3 days? 3 days gone, unaccounted for. 3 days which she had no idea what happened to her. Maybe it's for the best. Sassy brought the cup towards Ari's lips, but just before Ari could take a sip, she swiped it away and took a deep gulp of it herself, carelessly sloshing some of the water on the floor, all while staring at Ari with a malicious gleam in her eyes. Ari held back the frustrated sob roiling in her chest. She needed that water desperately, and this evil hag was wasting it on purpose. "Ah, yes, there it is," she said with a wicked smile, reading the anger and hatred on Ari's face, before coming back over and finally letting her drink from the cup. "For a moment I thought that you were as emotional as a stone. And what fun would that be?" Ari greedily gulped the water down, but Sassy wasn't careful, and most of it was flowing past the corners of Ari's mouth, pouring down her neck and soaking her. "Stop wasting it!" Ari screamed in her mind as she tried to get as much of the precious liquid into her mouth as she could. The cup was still a quarter full when Sassy took it away. "Don't drink all of it, you greedy cow," Sassy reprimanded as she put the cup back down on the tray. "You have to save some to wash down your food." She picked up the small bowl of rice and the spoon beside it and crouched in front of Ari again. Before she filled the spoon with rice, Sassy tapped the black band around Ari's left ankle with the handle of the spoon. "That thing lets us know if you go more than 100 feet from Sesfa. If you manage to get free or try to tamper with the band, Sesfa will get the signal, and you can say bye-bye to Mommy and Daddy." Ari nodded that she understood. She had already figured as much. It looked like the anklets people get when they're under house arrest. "Where am I?" Ari asked. "And where are my clothes?" Sassy considered not answering, but then shrugged as though it didn't matter. "Your clothes were taken because they were soaking wet, and Sesfa didn't want you to become ill before we could get you to Louisiana. And as to where you are, you're in Jashar's special room that he had made specially for filth like you." "Louisiana? They're taking me back to New Orleans? Who the heck is Jashar?" "No more questions. It's time to eat." Sassy scooped up a spoonful of rice from the bowl in her hand, and Ari's mouth watered in anticipation. Just as the spoon was almost in her mouth, the hydraulic lock hissed open, distracting Sassy and causing some of the rice to spill on the floor as she turned towards the opening door. After swallowing the rice that made it into her mouth, Ari hung her head in despair as she stared longingly at the grains scattered around her feet. "Got it," Naseth said as he held up the big roll of gray duct tape. "And this." He held up a sharp kitchen knife in his other hand. "Well, hurry up," Sassy ordered him. Naseth gave Ari a warning look and pointed at her with the tip of the knife. "If you try anything while your hands are free," he lifted up his shirt so she could see the handgun sticking out of the waist of his pants. "I won't, I swear. You don't even have to use the duct tape. I'll cooperate," Ari tried to assure him, sounding as calm and rational as she could manage. Naseth made a derisive sound before going behind her. He slid the blade between her skin and the zip tie, and then cut the strip of plastic with a rough yank. Ari couldn't help the scream that erupted from her throat at the sheer agony flooding through her arms as they hung limply at her sides. Her hands were dripping with blood from her wrists, and the excruciating pain of the circulation returning to her hands caused her whole body to shake. "Move your arms," Sassy instructed. "Get the circulation moving." "I can't," Ari wailed. "I can't move them." Involuntary streams of tears spilled from the corners of Ari's eyes. Sassy put down the spoon and bowl of rice, then started patting Ari's arms and moving them around. Eventually, Ari's hands changed from purple to red, and Sassy felt that that was good enough and put them down to rest on Ari's lap, smearing blood on her thighs. "Shouldn't I bind her again?" Naseth asked. "Wait until I'm done feeding her," Sassy said. And then, with more patience than Ari would have expected from a shade, Sassy made sure the rest of the rice made it into Ari's mouth. When the rice was gone, she gave Ari the rest of the water and then helped her eat the peach. Even though it was bruised and past its optimal ripeness, it was the sweetest, most delicious thing Ari had ever eaten. When the meal was done, Naseth grabbed Ari's arms and brought them back behind her again. "You don't need to do this," Ari said. "Please, I just got the feeling back in my hands. I won't do anything, I swear." "Shut up," he grumbled as he began wrapping the tape around the raw, open sores on her wrists, making sure that it wasn't too tight this time. "Please," Ari begged, desperation creeping into her voice. "I'm cooperating." Her head was knocked to the side in a violent burst of pain when Sassy viciously slapped her across the face, and the metallic taste of blood filled Ari's mouth. "He said shut up," Sassy yelled. "Or do you want us to tell Sesva that you're being difficult?" Ari hung her head in defeat while Naseth finished taping her wrists, silent tears falling onto her lap. She could already feel the left side of her face starting to swell. When he was done, Naseth walked towards the door and picked up the empty tray on his way out of the cell. They both slid out the barely opened door, not giving Ari the chance to see what was beyond it. She had only been able to hear the loud hum of engines in a cavernous metallic space. The door sealed shut and the lights flicked off. Ari's head snapped up in panic. She had thought the darkness was over. "Please don't leave me in the dark," she cried out. "I'm cooperating! I'm cooperating!" she screamed. She began jerking in her chair so violently that she knocked it off balance and fell over. Her right side slammed against the floor, and she let out a savage scream full of pain, fear, and frustration. She used her sifting strength to free her wrist from the duct tape and then break free of the zip ties around her ankles. Kicking the chair away from her, she dragged herself across the floor until she felt a wall. And with the strength she had left, she healed herself as much as she could before she passed out. Ari woke up sprawled on the hard floor to silence and darkness again. But at least she wasn't in pain anymore. Curling up and resting her head on her arm, she began listing off her family's names out loud, just so she could hear something besides the beating of her heart, and evoking all the good feelings associated with them to stave off hopelessness and despair. Malu, Owen. Even though she had only a couple memories of them, they were an integral part of her. Their love transcended distance and time. Her mother had sacrificed her life for her, and she knew that her father would have moved heaven and earth to get to her if he could. "I'll be strong and fight to survive, Owen. I promise." "Mom, Dad, Jack, Sadie, Hector," she said, immersing herself in every fond memory she had of them. Holidays and vacations, family meals and games, lazy afternoons in the backyard, every precious moment of just being with them. When she exhausted every fond memory of them she had, she moved on to the others that she had claimed as family. Soren, Skylar. She missed her minion's almost constant presence. She was stabbed with a pang of guilt that she wouldn't be able to keep her promise to Soren. But Ari vowed that somehow, in some way, she would get back to them. Whether if it was in real life or only in dreams, she would see them again. Nothing breaks a pinky promise. Ari had thought that she'd been helping them, caring for them, and giving them someone to look up to. But they had taught her lessons in humility and compassion that she never would have known without them. And also how to make portals. But even if she was able to affect the walls of this cell, she didn't have nearly enough energy for that. It took almost everything she had just to help Soren create a portal from one room to another in the same building. How could she make one to connect from where she was now to the Rileys? Adam, Jamie, she continued on. Ari thought about the wonderful time she had spent at Paradise Glades and all the love, security, and companionship that Adam and Jamie had given her when they didn't have to. Those 4 months almost felt more like a dream now. Ruby, Jean-Baptiste, Cass. She thought about everything they had done for her. Cass sending Jean-Baptiste to find her in that canal. Jean-Baptiste taking her to the hospital and leaving that stuffed bear so she'd know that someone cared. And Ruby watching over her as she grew up with her loving family. Then Ari thought about the short time she'd spent in New Orleans, and that's when it occurred to her. Fett. Fett was the name of the beady-eyed shade that had come after me, the one from the diner. She now knew who had been in the cell with her when she had first awakened. It was Fett. He'd been sitting there with his night vision goggles, just staring at me in the darkness. That unsettling thought gave her chills and made her shudder in revulsion, so she went back to what she was doing. Cale, Reed, Tober. Ignoring the men's last actions of abandoning her, Ari thought the safety they had given her, and how everything they had taught her was invaluable, despite of how their relationship ended. Connor, Gemma, good old Connor with his model ships and his pack of obedient guard dogs, and Dennis. The thought of that lovable, goofy dog made her smile. And kind and loving Gemma. She had been like a grandmother to her and Cam. Cam. She couldn't say his name out loud. It hurt too much. Cam was her rock, her brother in battle, her best friend, her light in a dark world, the one who had been there for her over and over again, the one who had brought her back from the brink of death. She'd give anything to be dancing by that candlelit fountain to the beautiful music with her and Cam again. With her Cam again. Picturing the perfect moment in her mind, she could practically see it play out in front of her in all its enchanting splendor. Ari didn't know if it was her mind playing tricks on her, or if there really had been something different about Cam. At the time, her mind had been so muddled and preoccupied by everything that was happening, with Val and how she was going to deal with Mara. She'd been so taken aback by the random gesture and the fact that he was able to dance so well, that she had overlooked what she had seen in his eyes, the tenderness in the way he was holding her, the way he was aware of her. He wasn't looking at her like she was his little sister anymore. He'd been looking at her like she was the most precious thing in his world. The absoluteness of his love had enveloped her with a sparkling brilliance that wasn't quite lust or attraction. He'd been holding back. Cam is in love with me. How could I have been so oblivious? He had been holding back for my sake, because he must have thought I was too young. That's why he freaked out when I told him that I was older than we had thought. That was why he had chosen that song. He had been declaring his love for her and telling her that no matter how she felt about him, that he'd be there for her, no matter what. Ari wept bitter tears of sorrow, guilt, and regret. If there was anyone that Ari wanted to be completely in love with, it was Cam. He wasn't some fleeting crush based solely on attraction and lust. He was everything true love should be. But then she thought about how even if she could be in love with Cam, there would be no walking into old age together hand in hand. As her aging slowed to a crawl, Cam's would steadily march on without her. She would only have him for a moment before he grew old and died. So maybe it was for the best that she was alone, adrift. Her love only brought pain and put people in danger. Cam deserves so much more than I could give him anyway. He's better off without me. When the fluorescent lights began to flicker and buzz to life once again, Ari quickly crawled over to the back corner, hiding her face in her knees to protect her eyes from the harsh light. The hydraulic lock hissed, and when the door opened, Ari held up her hands in supplication while keeping her head down. I'm cooperating. I just couldn't stay in that chair anymore. I'm cooperating, I swear. She was met with silence, but then she heard the plastic food tray and something metal being placed on the floor. Don't make a mess, an unfamiliar voice said amidst the loud engine noise. Then the door abruptly closed and sealed shut. Ari was expecting darkness again, but miraculously the light stayed on, and she sighed in relief. Her time in the dark was over. Cautiously lifting her head, she saw the food tray on the floor by the door. The meager meal was much the same as the last one, except instead of a peach, there was now a banana. Next to the tray was a metal bucket. It wasn't hard to figure out what that was for, and she was thankful for it, since her bladder had been full for a while. After making sure the eating and waste areas were separated by as much distance as possible in the small space, Ari utilized the waste bucket behind the cover of the dented metal chair, in case someone came back. The cell was filled with the acrid smell of urine, but there wasn't anything she could do about it. There were more important things to think about. Ari eyed the food eagerly as she went over to the food tray. She took only a couple gulps of the water and then put it back on the tray, trying hard to exert some self-discipline and pace herself so she wouldn't demolish everything too fast. The shade had taken the spoon, probably fearful that she tried to use it as a weapon, so she scooped the rice into her mouth with her fingers. The banana was still green, so she decided to save it and half of her water for later. Now that the lights were on, she was able to see the old dried blood on her hands and the floor, and the new scars encircling her wrists from the zip ties. They are a symbol of my survival. I'm a survivor. I can survive this. She noticed the few grains of rice that Sazi had spilled earlier. Past the point of caring about the hygienic necessity of the 5-second rule, Ari went over and meticulously picked up every loose grain and ate them. Every calorie counted. It seemed as though they were only going to feed her sporadically, and she figured that with the scant amount of food they were giving her, she was going to quickly become malnourished, if she didn't die of dehydration first. She was startled by the hiss of the lock. The door opened a crack. "Get back!" the voice from before ordered. Ari quickly grabbed the banana and the cup from the tray and went back to the corner she had been in before. The shade peered in cautiously around the protection of the door, making sure she was staying put. He was a small, ferrety-looking guy, scrutinizing her through narrowed eyes. "Give me the banana and the cup," he demanded. "I was going to save them for later." "Nuh-uh," he said with a shake of his head. "Not how it works. You eat and drink when the food comes. That's it. No saving it for later." "Please, the banana is still green. It's just a little bit of water to keep me hydrated. You guys aren't giving me enough." "Are you complaining?" he asked, his brow rising in an incredulous arch. "It could be nothing, you ungrateful—" No, it's fine," Ari interrupted, then quickly ate the banana in a couple large bites and gulped down the last of the water. After putting... Oh, the package might be here. Nothing was there. No, it's fine," Ari interrupted, then quickly ate the banana in a couple large bites and gulped down the last of the water. After putting the peel into the cup, she started to get up to go hand it to him, but he held up his hand for her to stop, and she froze. "Don't," he said, not trusting her to get close to him. He was a scrawny little guy, and even in her weakened state, he was no match for her. "Just, roll it over," he suggested. Ari sighed, then put the cup down on its side and rolled it over to him. As soon as the cup made it over, he picked it up, then grabbed the tray and closed the door. Once it locked, the lights went out again. "Oh, come on!" Ari screamed and banged the walls with her fists in frustration. "Transit umbra e luperstat. Transit umbra elu prestat, she said over and over like a mantra, hoping the prayer-like phrase would take her to the light of another day, just as it had for Cam's grandfather during the Vietnam War. She kept repeating the phrase until her throat was raw and her voice finally gave out. She stretched out on the floor, her consciousness drifting aimlessly, like a jellyfish on a restless tide. Then another memory lanced through the mental wall. Little Senna followed deftly behind her uncle through the bustling marketplace, keeping her head down and staying at an appropriate distance for a Gaian slave. Not that she had much choice in the matter. The servant torque adorning her neck prevented her from staying too far away from the corresponding brace on Vronnen's wrist, forcing her to keep up with his pace. Even though she was traditionally too young for him to be parading around the city, the auspiciousness of her servant torque marked her as a high-born guard's property. Behave yourselves. The adolescent Gaian male at her side also helped the ruse. Vronnen had purchased Darius second-hand from some merchants in the outskirts to act as her older brother, making them a set, so people left them alone and forgave such eccentricities due to Vronnen's status, though because of his disguise, no one knew exactly how high-born he was. The Malethian... Ladies, what are you doing? Get off of her. Hey, leave her alone. The Malethian market was a vibrant and lively place, full of exotic creatures and various marvels to excite the senses. But Senna resisted temptation and kept her head down, not making eye contact with anyone, as Vronnen had instructed. He strode purposely through the mass of the clamorous crowd, ignoring the incessant adverts and the calls of the vendors plying their wares, knowing the eyes of the Carno informants could be anywhere. Now that they had the name of a trusted cargo pilot, all they needed to do was get through the market unnoticed and reach the docks. There they would finally be able to leave Emuria and meet at the rendezvous point with Owen and Esseret. Senna caught a brief glimpse of herself as they passed by the shiny surface of a vendor's wares. She barely recognized the reflection as her own. Her hair had grown in thick and dark, and it was now a sufficient length to cover the runes on her head and allow her to pass as a boy. Among the many other runes the Shazamin had marked on her scalp, he had enhanced the disguising rune she already had. This ensured that when her hair grew back, it would not be her natural pale, pearlescent color, which would have given her away, but it would be as dark and as thick as her mother's and uncle's. That was one of the reasons they had chosen Darius, because his skin color and black hair were similar to her new coloring, though his hair was curly while hers was straight, and his eyes were green while her eyes were decidedly iron. It was close enough. The Shazamin couldn't use a rune to change her eye color, but he gave Vronnen a tech elixir to drop into her eyes that would cloud her irises and deaden the iron colors. Senna hated the way the tech made her eyes burn when Vronnen applied the drops, but she refused to cry out and shame herself in front of her uncle. She understood that concealment was necessary. When Senna could hear the sound of the ship engines over the noise of the crowd, her heart soared. They were almost there. But as soon as she became elated, her scalp started to tingle painfully as she sensed Vronnen's fear and his intention sharpen. He suddenly stopped, causing her and Darius to knock into his back. Vronnen stood there, tense and still as the crowd moved around them. Senna was too small to see what had made him stop, but she knew it was bad enough to keep them from their goal. In one swift, smooth motion, Vronnen turned and picked her up in his arms and began running in the opposite direction, forcing Darius to keep pace behind him by the pull of the torque. Senna held on tightly and concealed her face in his shoulder as Ronan maneuvered through the crowd, her heart breaking more and more the further they traveled from the docks. Risking a quick glance behind them, she didn't see the Carno thugs coming after them as she expected. It was much worse. They were being pursued by armor-clad Arnasaru soldiers. The bright buzzing lights and the sound of the opening door... They were being pursued by armor-clad Arnasaru soldiers. The bright buzzing lights and the sound of the opening door tore Ari out of her newest memory and dragged her slowly away from the languorous half-sleep she was stuck in. The same ferret guy from before put the food tray by the door, quickly switched out the waste buckets, and then took the metal chair with him when he left. Even though Ari felt weak and dizzy, her body ached from lying on the hard floor. She crawled over to the tray and was happy to see that there was a pile of shredded cheese on her rice this time. She was thankful for the little bit of fat, calcium, and protein it would give her. Her mind wandered as she ate. I knew a human in my life before Earth. He couldn't have been older than 14 or 15. What happened to him and Ronan? When her time to eat was over, the empty tray was taken and the light went out again. In an attempt to stave off despair, Ari spent her time thinking about all the memories that she'd recovered since the accident. Trying to put all the pieces together to form a patchwork narrative, it seemed to be leading up to her coming to Earth. She figured that whatever events transpired to bring her to Earth, it must have happened soon after that last memory, because her hair hadn't been too much longer than that when she had woken up from the coma. When that train of thought was exhausted, she began to hum and sing every song she knew, between bouts of fitful sleep. When she exhausted that, she thought over all the stories she read, then the movies, then the TV shows. It was times like this that having a hyperthymistic memory came in handy. After a while, Ari figured that they had to be traveling on some kind of large cargo ship or a barge, because the loud thrumming of the engines was a constant every time the cell door opened. And if it had been a plane, they would have been in New Orleans long ago. What was the Shade's dark purpose for her? A chill ran through her when she realized she didn't know to what lengths she would be willing to go to save her family. What despicable things would she do for the Shades in order to protect her parents? I will not be a monster. Mom and Dad wouldn't want me to be a monster for them. I'm not a monster. I'm not. The cell began to feel like it was closing in on her, choking her airways. Yeah, it was choking her airways. Choking her airways, and she started to hyperventilate. She couldn't stand the confining darkness anymore. It was driving her mad. Courage, little one. Absalom's voice sounded in her ears. Ari flinched. She could sense that there was no one else in the room, so she knew that Absalom's voice was only in her head. But it sounded like he was right there beside her. There may come a time when you are surrounded by darkness, and the only light you'll find will be your own. Absalom's voice repeated from the litany of his vague pieces of advice. I'm losing it. I'm starting to go insane. Just remember that you're capable of so much more than you even realize. Trust in yourself and shine through the darkness. Shut up! Ari screamed at the phantom voice while putting her hands over her ears to stubbornly shut it out. Calm yourself and focus, little one. Ah! Fine! Ari yelled in resignation, sitting up and leaning against the wall. She tried to figure out what the auditory hallucination was trying to tell her. Okay, surrounded by darkness. Only light will be my own. Blah, blah, blah. She mused aloud. I'm capable of more than I know. Shine through the darkness. Be calm and focus. Then she had it. Ari thought about how Ellie created her little sparks of light. She knew that she had to somehow focus on the limited amount of photon particles around her and concentrate them into a visible spark of light. Okay, focus. Taking deep, slow breaths, Ari began clearing her mind. She cupped her hands in front of her and used her kinetic will to coax all the photons that had come from the fluorescent light and had spread out and collected in the atoms of walls after it had been turned off, and tried to make them coalesce into a spark in her hands. Nothing was happening at first, so she focused her intent and willed it to be, like she had in the in-between with Absalom. And there it was, floating in her hands, a tiny spark in the darkness. I did it! Focusing even more, she channeled her energy into it to amplify the brightness, and the spark got brighter. It had gone from a spark to a fully formed, marble-sized ball of light, floating above her cupped hands. Thank you, Absalom, she said as tears of joy rolled down her cheeks. She was able to keep the ball of light floating around her for as long as she needed. Light has no mass, so it took minimal energy to hold it up. She even named it Lux, making it fly loop-de-loops in the air and having it follow her as she moved around the confines of her cell. He became her little friend. Not able to bring herself to extinguish her new friend, she hid Lux in the palm of her hand when the lights came on again. After her meal, the changing of the waste bucket, and the lights inevitably going off again, she used the extra photons in the wall to make another ball of light and named it Luz. After 2 more meals, she also had Liz and Lemire. She made them chase each other around, making designs and constellations in the air. She even gave them parts to play out in their own little light ball soap opera. Lux was always the hero. Liz was the comic relief. Lemire was a bit of a cad, and Luz was a horrible tease. I tried to make them change colors so she could tell them apart easier. She managed to make Liz a light indigo, Lemire a pale blue, and Luz was just barely violet. Anyone else probably wouldn't have been able to tell the difference, but Ari could, and that's all that really mattered. She kept Lux as she had first made him, though, because he was special. He was her first spark. He was always the brightest, and he had saved her from sanity from the oppressive darkness. And he had saved her sanity from the oppressive darkness. When her next meal didn't come for longer than expected, Ari started to become nervous. Are they going to completely starve me now? But eventually the lights came on, and the door finally opened. And that's when she realized that the engine sound was gone. They had finally made it to their destination. Ari let her light ball friends dissipate, all except for Lux, whom she kept enclosed in her hand. He had become her lifeline, something she couldn't let go. Sazi walked in carrying a plastic bag and cringing in disgust. Ugh, it's rancid in here, she said, waving a hand in front of her face. Ari was way beyond caring about the smell anymore. It had become a part of her existence. Let her get a good whiff and wallow in what they've done to me. Here, Sazi said as she tossed the plastic bag to where Ari sat in the corner. I'll be back in 5 minutes, so be ready. She went back out the door and locked it behind her. Ari looked into the bag and saw that she had just been given clothes to wear. There was a white tank top undershirt and a pair of men's gray sweatpants, but no socks or shoes. Thankful for anything to wear besides the underwear she'd been in for who knows how long, she eagerly pulled them out of the bag. She kept her sports bra on for at least a semblance of dignity, but she threw her underwear into the waste bucket. If she'd had enough energy and knew how to set it on fire like Zachary Brandt could, she would have. As soon as she was done getting dressed, Ari hid Lux in her hand once more and sat in the corner to wait. When Sazi returned, Naseth, Ferret Guy, and one other unfamiliar shade came in behind her. The unfamiliar one was staring at her robotic foot with unabashed curiosity. Naseth was holding the roll of duct tape, and Ferret Guy had the black sack that she'd had on over her head before. "Get up and get over here," Naseth ordered. Ari got up, having to take a second to lean against the wall to wait for the lightheadedness to subside. Once she felt in control, she started to slowly make her way over in slow, measured steps. And Naseth, after showing her that he still had his gun in the waist of his pants, went behind her so he could bind her wrists again. "I hope you shoot yourself, you stupid jackhole." "Wait," said the Ferret Guy. "What does she have in her hand?" "It's nothing," Ari assured him. "Check it," Sazi ordered the unfamiliar shade. "No," Ari insisted. "You don't have to. It's nothing." She didn't know why it was so important to keep Lux away from the shades. It just was. Perhaps she needed to feel some control over something in her life. When the shade tried to pry her left hand open, almost out of reflex, Ari's right hand pulled back and swiftly punched him in the jaw. Then something hard smashed against the back of her skull, and her vision exploded in a white-hot blast of stars before she fell unconscious. Wow, that was the end of chapter 27. I feel like that went pretty smoothly after so many false starts that we had that you don't know about. Oh, Mama, that doesn't look like the most comfortable position, but you sure are cute. Oh, Kootsy Bean. I got all sorts of Kootsy Beans around here. And Emma, my kitty cat, she's all curled up there. Well, hot diggity dog, we are on to chapter 28. How about them apples? Thank you for joining us. We're going to do 28 in the next video because this one was a long one. But not as long as I expected. It was 12 pages. We really went through that. Oh, and I think I have to let my goats out. We'll see if we can do another chapter. I hope so. Either way, see you next time. Thank you for joining us. Peace.